only in Islam. If an atheist came out tomorrow and said, there's nothing wrong with a grown man having sex with a little girl, he would be shunned by the atheist community. But in Islam, not only is it perfectly acceptable to defend and promote sex with little girls, it's apparently one of the defining features of Islam's top scholars and most beloved apologists. Why are these grown men in Western nations in the 21st century openly defending and promoting pedophilia? Because their prophet was a pedophile.
Faster than you can say a mental hospital hammers and disabled kids, David Wood will repeat the same old arguments against Islam over and over and over again. So let's get into the first part of what he says. Now, he says that if an atheist says it's okay to have sex with a little girl, if an atheist says it's okay for a grown man to have sex with a little girl, he'll be shunned by the atheist community. But the problem is, if you're an atheist, you have no standard for morality. You have no objective standard for morality. It's just your opinion, right? So, of course, the atheists aren't going to shun somebody for saying, yeah, it's okay for a grown man to marry or have sex with a little girl, because they have no standard for morality to begin with. So an atheist can't say something is moral or immoral because they don't know what that is. They don't have any standard for it, or at least any kind of objective standard for it. So that's one of the problems with atheists. The atheist can't justify morality. So with atheism, it's not a point about epistemology, how you know the moral law. It's more of a point of ontology. Why does the moral law exist, or why does the moral law apply? So the atheist can never justify morality. So, who cares? Who cares if an atheist says, yeah, it's okay for a grown man to have sex with a little girl? Well, they got no standard for morality anyway. So, what's the point here? But anyways, so that refutes his atheistic point. Now, with this Mohammad Hijab and Ali Dawah thing, then I'll go into the claim that the Prophet Muhammad is a pedophile. But anyways, if Mohammad Hijab and Ali Dawah are saying it's okay for a grown man to marry and have sexual intercourse with a 9-year-old girl, they are not following Islam. They're following their own sexual fantasies and desires. Now, Mohammad Hijab and Ali Dawah are not they're not the sharpest tools in the shed, so to speak. They're not the brightest. They're not the sharpest pencils in the box, so to speak. They're not really that. All Mohammad Hijab does is shout, "Oh, you are a kuffar, yada yada yada. You keep watching Netflix, yada yada." And then he beats his chest like a big old monkey. But Mohammad Hijab and Ali Dawah are literally the stupidest, they're one of the stupidest Muslim apologists out there. They're both pretty stupid in their actions, and they don't know how to defend Islam correctly. But anyways, in Islam, going back to Mohammad Hijab and Ali Dawah, they're just projecting their own. If they're saying, yeah, it's okay for a grown man to marry and have sex with a little girl, like it's okay for a 50-year-old to marry and have sex with a 6-year-old or a 9-year-old girl, they're just following their own sexual fantasies or their own sexual desires. But they're not following Islamic theology, because in Islamic theology, you can only marry a young woman or a young lady when she is physically and mentally fit for marriage. Now, getting to this whole, the Prophet Muhammad's a pedophile thing. Well, the problem is pedophilia didn't exist, 1,500 years ago. There was no such thing as pedophilia back then. The whole issue is that, a pedophile is someone who has sex with multiple children, right? So, it has to be a recurring thing. In order for someone to be a pedophile, they have to have sex with like a bunch of like little kids and stuff like that. The Prophet Muhammad married Aisha when she was 6 years old and consummated the marriage when she was 9 years old. I'm not denying that. That's true. The Prophet Muhammad married a 6-year-old girl. That's true. I mean, I'm not saying that hadith is weak or that hadith is false or anything like that. That's a Sahih hadith. You can't get around that. The whole thing is that back 1,500 years ago, and I don't know how many times I keep saying this, but back then it was very common for older men to marry young girls. That's just the way it was back then, not just in the Middle East, but everywhere in Roman culture, in I don't know, Indian culture, in Chinese culture, and you know, Arab Jewish culture, like African culture, whatever culture it was back, 1,500 years ago. It was perfectly normal for an older man to marry a much younger girl. That's just the way society is. Society has changed. The Prophet Muhammad's example is marrying a young woman who is mentally and physically fit for marriage. So, that doesn't qualify someone being a pedophile. Someone being a pedophile is a grown person having sex with a little girl in modern society. 1,500 years ago, there was no such thing as pedophilia. There was no such thing as, child molester. There was no such thing as that. The whole thing is that, society has changed a lot since those days. Back in those days, it was perfectly okay for someone to marry a young girl when she's mentally and physically fit for marriage. We know that's not the case today because we know little girls today, 9-year-old or 6-year-old girls, are not mentally and physically fit for marriage. So the Prophet Muhammad was doing no more or no less than what other men his age were doing back 1,500 years ago in Arabia. So pedophilia didn't exist back then. Pedophilia is a 21st century concept which doesn't apply, 1,500 years ago. But so there's no such thing as the Prophet Muhammad being a pedophile because that certainly didn't exist back in those times. But if David Wood wants to go there, the question I want to ask David Wood, and or if he's watching this video, please feel free to comment below. David Wood, are you a Christian? Let me rephrase that. David Wood, are you a Bible believing Christian? If you say yes, then I want you to answer this question. In Numbers chapter 31, verses 17 to 18, it says, young girls, Moses tells his followers, young girls can be sexually abused, and Moses tells his soldiers it's okay to, take the little ones, the little girl children, as your sexual slaves, or it's okay to sexually abuse them or have sex with them. Now, I want David Wood to answer this question. Is it okay? Is it morally right for Moses to tell his followers in Numbers chapter 31, verses 17 to 18, it's okay to have sex with little girls? If you're a Bible-believing Christian, you can't dismiss the Old Testament. You can't just say, oh, that's the Old Covenant. No, because if you read 2 Timothy, it says all Scripture is allowed for training in morality and righteousness. So I want David Wood to answer this question. If he's consistent, he has to criticize the Bible too. He has to leave Christianity and he has to become an atheist in order to make this claim. But even if David Wood becomes an atheist, he can't make this claim because as an atheist, you have no standard to say something is moral or immoral other than your own personal opinion. You got no objective standard. You just got subjective standards. So again, if David Wood is a Bible-believing Christian, he has to answer Numbers chapter 31, verses 17 to 18 in order to be consistent. If he doesn't answer Numbers chapter 31, verses 17 to 18, he's inconsistent. And if someone is inconsistent, then they have a failed argument. So these Christians always accuse me of being inconsistent. Yet when it comes to Islam, they're very inconsistent because they throw the Bible under the bus and just keep pointing the finger at Islam. No, we have to look at the Bible and we have to look at the Quran. We have to look at Judaism, Christianity, and Islam if we're going into this whole moral argument. If you're going into moral arguments. So is the Prophet Muhammad a pedophile? No, because he was doing what men his age were doing, which was marrying a young woman who was mentally and physically fit for marriage. So the correct age for marriage back then is, puberty, when a girl reaches adulthood, and girls matured way faster back then than they do now. Mohammad Hijab and Ali Dawah are just projecting their own sexual fantasies into Islam. If they're saying it's okay to marry 9-year-old girls today. If they're saying it's okay for a grown man to marry 6-year-old or 9-year-old girls in today's culture, then they need to stop and they need to get some professional help, because they're projecting their own sick sexual fantasies on little girls, and they need professional help. So I hope they get that. So this refutes David Wood's claim. Stay tuned, more videos coming up.